Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Chris Kirk. It's my privilege to run the Startup Hub here at Lot 14. And tonight is one of my favorite events. It's an event we've been doing for a little while in partnership with 11.2 that I'll introduce in a second. And we've had a fantastic lineup of speakers over the last few months. In fact, we were just talking about last month's speaker, Rowan Hampden from XDI. Did anyone attend last month out of interest? Great, we've got a few repeat offenders. But yeah, this series is really an informal opportunity to hear an entrepreneur's story. And tonight we're really lucky to have Anthony, thank you for coming along, mate, to tell his story with Josh from 11.2. Before we start, I will just acknowledge that the land we meet on tonight is the land of the Ghana people, and we pay respects to elders past and present. This is an informal session. We'd love it to be an open forum. Please do save up questions. We'll be passing around a microphone. And to everyone that's online, welcome. And I encourage you also to just drop some questions in the chat. And Josh, our fantastic moderator, will make sure we pass those through. It's a short session tonight, probably go for around half an hour with questions. And then we've got some pizzas and drinks coming. So I encourage you to stick around, ask any questions, and enjoy the evening. And without further ado, I'll pass to Josh. Josh, do you want to introduce yourself and take things from here?
Yes, thanks, Chris. And thanks, everyone, for coming tonight. So I'm Josh. I work at 11.2. I'm the lab director there. So we're an idea validation company that works with large organizations and government to uncover and validate technology-enabled business ideas that help the world in some way. And it's my pleasure tonight to have Anthony here from MicroX. Anthony, originally born overseas in the UK, came to Australia in 2006 and has been over here in South Australia for the last 6 or 7 years now. Yeah, 6 or 7 years. And Anthony, like myself, is trained as a mechanical engineer, but from his LinkedIn profile, which I had to peruse this morning as I was handed the baton for tonight to be the moderator from George Freney, who unfortunately has lost his voice today and hasn't been able to speak. I garnered that Anthony has had a breadth of experience working for and with entrepreneurs in a variety of endeavors, both from a consulting side as well as within businesses, and has had the opportunity to work on multiple products and see them both succeed and fail. And I thought that would be a really great set of stories and experiences to share with an audience that are both entrepreneurial and in terms of their current endeavors or looking to start something in the future. And I'm hoping that Anthony will have a few pieces of advice as well as stories to share.
Promise to solve all your problems.
With that, maybe Anthony, if you can start from the beginning. So tell me a bit about your childhood and why you got into engineering.
Actually, I fell into engineering. It was a bit by chance. As a child, I loved tinkering with things. I loved generally taking things apart, not so much putting them back together. I quickly learned from an early age that sticking things in plug sockets was bad, so I didn't like electronics. I was around when the next Spectrum 48K computer came out. I don't know if anyone remembers that, rubber keys. I spent about 6 days of my life writing a computer program on that, which didn't work, so I decided that software wasn't for me either. But I happened to be quite useful at physics and chemistry, so I decided to become a mechanical engineer. I literally fell into it. And my first role in mechanical engineering was for a large telecoms company called Lucent Technologies, which was formed overnight when AT&T, the largest telecoms provider on the planet, just split in half. So they half the company designing products and infrastructure, and the other half the company selling services. And yeah, I learned very quickly that mostly all the mechanical engineering I'd learned at university was fairly useless. And it was all about really how you think and solving problems. And the old school mechanical engineering that I'd learned around developing power stations was never going to be something I'd ever use in my career. Instead, I'd focus on electronics packaging. So I did that for a number of years. And then I found myself working in a few industries. I worked in the vacuum industry, which proved to be quite useful in my current role. I also worked for a startup company in the hardware IT space, so developing a super fast file server, which I think was scaling up to do 1 terabyte, unheard of at the time, 1 terabyte USB keys. A year later, they could do 1 terabyte. And through personal circumstances, after having met my wife in London, I moved to Australia and ended up as a consultant at a company called Invitech. And that's where I really had the opportunity to work with all sorts of different businesses, small companies, large companies, one-man bands, all sorts of people would walk through the door.
What were the best and worst projects at Invitech?
I mean, the worst thing about working as a consultant, as you yourself, is operating 5 projects at the same time with customers in the US, in Europe, and then customers in Australia at the same time. I had one chap who'd actually, unfortunately, decided to put his house up for mortgage and was trying to design a plastic cement mixer. And it took me all of about half an hour's worth of engineering to tell him it's never going to work, mate. But so you had a few things like that. But generally,
Perpetual motion machines.
Yeah, generally
Yeah.
people had some pretty good ideas, but they really didn't have an idea about how to commercialize it. And that was the thing. So as a consultant, you feel obliged to explain, yes, you could spend a lot of money doing this engineering and we will help you and we will deliver you a great product, but what are you going to do with it next? So we weren't too many of those at Invitec. It was more at the larger end. So I worked with companies like Coca-Cola and big medical device companies that no one would have heard of, high throughput screening machines for pathology testing that have been used for COVID, a lot of automation. Now, these were just much larger businesses that their challenge was they couldn't innovate. And that's why they would come to the consulting company to try and get things done, to solve problems, to get things done quickly.
Yeah.
They
Why-
had the benefit, they had the commercial outlet.
Why do you think they struggled to innovate? What was it that?
I think it's mostly around process. Engineers love process. We love, if you've got to write a cooking recipe and follow it, we do it every day of the week. Now, what tends to happen, I see it a lot in large organizations, is all the people that invented the process have gone years ago.
Yeah.
The process has evolved and it's got bigger and bigger to the point where there's just more people to service it and there's a lot of churn, not necessarily a lot of value. So the large businesses they're interested to get different people to come in. A lot of large businesses, you see it today, they buy small startups, they buy the technology in and they do their best not to, I don't use the word bastardize the mindset of the innovative young company. But over time, eventually it happens because the inventive people leave, they go and start something new and no one really understands where it all came from. It's slow to evolve, but they have critical mass, and that's the key. So where small startups struggle, large companies thrive. So there's a kind of balance, and somewhere in the middle is a sweet spot. I haven't found it yet.
Yeah, interesting. I'm curious out there in the room, any individuals that either have sold a small business to a larger business or intend to? Show of hands or? Yeah, a couple. It's my experience is that it's an exit strategy that a lot of people hope for, but it is hard to execute and rarely successful, despite how often it's done in the context of the underlying business surviving within the confines of the larger organization eventually.
It's generally quite hard. And one of the more innovative businesses I work with is Coca-Cola. Now, I was quite surprised when Coca-Cola came to work with Invitec. They canvassed the whole planet looking for what they called the best engineering consulting firms to work with. And they selected a software company in the US, an electronics hardware company also in the US, and they came to Australia for the systems integration and mechanical and fluidics design, Invitec. And I worked on this big project. I led the project to basically introduce what's called the Coca-Cola Freestyle. It's a drinks dispensing machine. You walk up and program your own recipe in and pour the drink out. And it's using this really novel microfluidic technology, the size of a video cassette, can make millions of drinks. And it's a fully self-contained machine, terrific piece of equipment. And at the time when Coca-Cola came in and I was speaking to them, who had the idea, and they are an ideas company, but they outsourced absolutely everything. So all the existing drinks dispensers were made by other big companies. And they literally bought them in, put the Coca-Cola label on, put the Coca-Cola product in, and spent all of their resources and money on marketing, which was terrific. And I remember having a conversation once. I was talking to the engineering manager there who thanked me for this. And we were arguing over, this is a $20 million project. We were arguing over a $70,000 scope creep in one phase. And he was refusing to pay it. And I said, if you don't pay it, we can't do this work, and so on and so forth. Someone came out of the room next door at Coca-Cola Towers and said, how much are you talking about? And I said, 70,000. He said, that was half a second of the advert I just put on TV during the Super Bowl or something. So but fascinatingly, they had this enormous tech campus. It's Willy Wonka's factory,
Right.
full of all these crazy things. So they were quite an innovative bunch, but they never really put any of it into the market. It was a very odd place, but I enjoyed working there because it enabled me to understand a little bit more about the importance of being properly customer focused. And that's an important message that I'd like to get across tonight, because a lot of people think about the customer as the person using their product or the person consuming their product. But when you're bringing a disruptive technology into the market or an innovative product, there are hundreds of more people you've got to influence along the way. And you don't wait until the end. You have to actually devise your whole strategy from the outset. If your strategy is to sell the business, you need to consider that from day one. Not because we've got to a point, we've run out of money, we've finished, hopefully someone will buy us. And in order to get through all the barriers to commercial success. You've got to really understand each stakeholder or customer intimately and do what they need to tick the box. I'll give a good example. Micro-X has a really novel mobile X-ray card. We've reinvented the way X-rays are made. It's disruptive, but in the mobile X-ray market space, it's not super disruptive. It's smaller, it's lighter, it's reliable, lasts forever, it's cheaper to operate, all these great things, but it still takes the same X-rays as everyone else's machines, just different. And we find when we're trying to market the product, we can't even submit for a tender spec because there'll be a tick box item that somebody has written, they have no idea what it really means, that says something like, your cart must have motors. We don't have motors because it doesn't weigh very much. The 600 kilogram ones have the motors because you can't push them around. We can't enter the tender. If we'd have known that way back then, I might have put a little motor in somewhere that did something. There's a simple way around it.
Yeah.
I can stick the box into a motor.
Yeah, motorize one of the wheels just for fun.
Just something for fun. Yeah, that's right. You can be creative by that.
Yeah. So large organizations, going back to that for a second, Coca-Cola is a good example. I think what you're suggesting is that sometimes they miss some of that customer focus when you broaden the definition of customer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very much focused on the consumer and the outcome of what drives their revenue, which is sales, clearly. So who's buying the product, right? That's the consumer. But they've got beautifully large distribution channels and networks. It's there. And in the technology space, in the hardware technology space in particular, they are very expensive things to build. So you have very little option other than to find someone that's already got one. And you need to do that quite early because you need to make sure that they are prepared to market and sell your product. And that's an example of our customers for our X-ray, medical X-ray cards, our radiographers in hospitals. I bring them around all the time. They come around, they tour the factory, they love the machine. I have to stop them wheeling it out. But there's 25 people in the way for them to buy one. And I have to make sure I've appealed to all of those people and they're aware of it all through the process. Procurement cycles may be refreshed every 5-6 years. They write lists. These companies are on the list. Out goes a tender. South Australia put a tender out for some mobile X-ray cards recently. We're the only sovereign company in Australia that can make X-ray cards. We're in South Australia. We've been funded by the government. And yet we can't get on the list because we weren't on the original tender list because we didn't have the motorized cart box. You can tell that one annoys me a bit.
Yeah, I can tell annoys you, but I'm sure there's an interesting lesson in there as well for entrepreneurs and founders in general, which is that some of that thinking ahead of, I guess in this context, customer as wider group, including the people that have to certify, that have to approve, that
it is
all the people that,
regulators, your supply chain partners, your distributors, everybody needs the box ticked, and you have to design and architect your whole business model. And I guess just try and do everything that makes them aware. I've got a bigger problem ahead of me, which I'm trying to figure out now. I'm trying to put a CT in the back of every ambulance. Now, I've got significant funding from the Commonwealth to do that. It's come through the Australian Stroke Alliance. And
sorry, for the benefit of the audience, does everyone know what a CT machine is? Yes, pretty much.
It's for stroke imaging. So if you have stroke is the third largest killer globally, and cancer being the first, heart attack being the second. And roughly 85% of strokes are what I call ischemic strokes. There's a clot in your brain. Now, in the first 2 or 3 hours, if they are able to diagnose the clot in your brain and they administer the thrombolysis drug, TPA, you're likely to have 100% recovery, no problem. 15%, unfortunately, are hemorrhagic strokes. It's a very small bleed in the brain. If you give the thrombolysis drugs to someone with a hemorrhagic stroke, instant death. So the person sat there with the injector is thinking,
hard decision without a machine.
The only way they can do it was with a CT X-ray. So they did a 3-dimensional image of your head and look for a clot. They actually look for the hemorrhage. If they can't see the hemorrhage, they assume it's a clot. They do the drug, and they're generally right. Generally. So we're trying to make that, because time is such a critical aspect. We want that to be point of care. So we want to put it in the back of every ambulance. At the moment, there are a few running around where they've got a big CT, again, a 700-800 kilogram machine inside a specially built ambulance, cost $1.5 million. If it turns up to roadside accident, useless. It's only got the CT in it. But our technology is so small and disruptive, we can make that. We can make it in. So it's pretty exciting. Now, I've got, through the Australian Stroke Alliance, I've got all the neurologists involved in stroke across Australia and across the globe interested. all the paramedics, all the ambulance services, all the war flying doctors, they're all part of the Stroke Alliance. They're an amazing, innovative bunch of people. They're really forward thinking in how they can provide this enhanced capability. At some point, I'll build it in the next year or two. It'll be in an ambulance. We'll do some clinical trials. We'll get the certification, and I won't be able to sell it because there'll be a regulation somewhere that says it's a radiation emitting device. You need a license. So those are the sorts of things you've got to try and identify early. And now I've got to think about how I talk to the regulator, how I talk to people that write the legislation to change the rules, so that when I get to that commercialization point and I've spent tens of millions of dollars to get there, I can actually sell one. And it's different in every country. So it could be quite simple.
Yeah, so the lesson there is trying to think more broadly beyond the jump that I think coming from a North American context of every startup now focuses on designing for humans and designing for their customers, but really thinking a little bit more broadly than that again. Absolutely. And saying you're really thinking about the design with the context of all the end customers in the context of your supply chain, the regulators, everyone.
To be successful, customer-centric design for me, it means everybody involved.
Yeah.
So if you see quite frequently, you can engage brilliant industrial design teams and they'll do a stakeholder map, an empathy map. It's like a target, and they map people, and the closer you are to the middle, the more important you are to how the product's being used, kind of thing. Terrific tool. A lot of people then focus on the few in the middle.
Yeah.
And you do need to, if the radiographers don't like it, or if the radiologists think the imaging is not good enough, then I don't have a product. So they're important. But you do have to address everybody to get it to them at the right time in the journey. It's not at the end.
So how do you know the right time? I'm just like the constant battle of any startup is just time poor. As an entrepreneur, you're trying to get as much done as quickly as possible. I'm like, how far ahead in the design process should you be thinking? What's the rule of thumb?
I think right at the beginning, a lot of people are very technology-led in the entrepreneurial space. They've got an idea, they've got some tech or an idea of some tech, and they want to focus on making that work.
Yeah.
You need to get that to a point where you're confident that it will work. It's still going to take a lot of effort and time, but it should work. Get to the point where you could go and speak to an investor and say, look, I've done enough to suggest that it might work. Would you give me some money? That's really the time, I think, then to step back and actually see many business cases, and they might have something like go-to-market strategy, channel partner. No, now that is the time to actually really dive in and go, really, what is my go-to-market strategy? What are the barriers to getting there? Who's involved? And then derive a plan. So you are time poor. You don't have to contact everybody at the beginning. You just got to work out who's important when, and then try and work out what you're delivering to appease them early. I'll give you another example. Under some defense contracts, mobile X-ray cart is being used to upgrade field deployed hospitals. It's perfect. At the moment, they're using veterinary X-ray, not particularly good for our troops. And they build these, they're called Roll 2 hospitals, and it's a bit like MASH 101. And they wheel this veterinary X-ray around, and the radiographer said, we can't really X-ray the people, so it's much easier.
Designed for a horror.
Yeah, exactly. So we thought, great. We've got great interest here in Australia, but we've already got the contract. Perfect. We signed it up. We'll waltz over to the US Army. We know they're using the veterinary X-ray. Surely they'll want to buy it. Look at this product. They want it. 7-year procurement cycle. We just missed it by 2 months.
So now you have to wait another 7 years, 6 years and 10 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. If we'd have known that,
you probably would have talked to them 2 months ago.
Might have done something. You can avoid some of the situation. And it is hard to find out, but there are people that know. And you just have to ask around.
Yeah.
Ask the question.
Yeah. So asking people in your industry, what are the barriers I might encounter in the future is probably the right
That's exactly
sentiment.
right.
Yeah. What are the little things that might catch me that,
And it's nearly always around procurement and supply.
Oh, interesting.
So I actually don't find
more now than previously, or supply chain shortages and Shipmageddon.
Oh, look, yeah, those sorts of things come into play in impacting things like lead time. I would say that's more of an issue if somebody wants an X-ray machine tomorrow and I say, no, it's 8 weeks. They might buy someone else who's got one ready to go. That's not really the end of the world. No, it's more in the, it depends on which space who's buying your product. If you're putting a product into a retail space, you have to hit the shelf time. I did products for Philips that would start the product in January. They had to have the product ready in November to hit the December retail. They'd already booked the shelf space from the retailer. If they lost it, it's not like you can go back in January or February and put it in. It had to be there in December. If they lost it, it's next December. And probably they turn around and go, we don't trust you. We're not going to bother. So It's all about understanding these things. It just drives your mindset, think differently. Maybe make some different decisions. Maybe not add this feature, don't perfect that, just get it done to a level that's good enough. You can actually hit that commercial milestone. And the procurement thing is very much like that. Unlike the regulations more guide you how to do your job properly, I find. I think if people fight regulations, they're onto the losing wicket. You have to fight them. Sometimes they're a little frustrating, but generally, you read it at the start, that's what you've got to do. That's my design. It's only if you're doing something that's quite disruptive that doesn't match, then you've got an issue. We've had that problem.
Yeah.
And we've actually found a solution. We got a lot of medical imaging physicists together. They wrote the paper for us. It went to the regulator board and they said, fine, we'll accept that as a justification. So they're generally quite friendly. Cost a lot of money, takes a lot of time, but it helps. Again, in my experience working in a consultancy, it was the customers, and I won't name any names, but there are some customers that just felt regulations got in the way. And that made your life miserable. So you have to accept them, work with them.
They're hard to fight.
Hard to change. But they do change, and they change quite frequently as well. It's also not very helpful.
Yeah. So let's go back to the timeline for a second. So Invitech, and then what?
Yeah, so I was at Invitech, I think, for about 8 years, and I did the Coca-Cola job, the facial cleansing brush for Philips. I worked on integrated solar panels for BlueScope Steel. That was a terrific project. BlueScope Steel wanted, you buy about 5 different metal patterns for your roof at the moment, and they wanted to kind of, they recognized, I think, that consumers wanted to become green, right? We need to save the planet. Perfect. So rather than put glass solar panels on their roof, they wanted to integrate these flat solar panels on top of their roof. Another side story, they've actually got a paint that works as a photovoltaic cell, and it's terrific, but if a bird lands on your house, it fries. They haven't figured out the problems of it. But anyway, these ones are, so I actually worked with them for about a year, developed a new roofing profile that had the solar panel on top, but also did some convective cooling or heating of their house. Terrific product. So they launched it, and they went via one of the large building companies, and to offer this as an upgrade to a new build house, it was essentially an extra $5,000 on the standard roof costs. Not a single consumer took it up.
Even though it's more than that to put solar panels on your roof?
When it came to paying, when it came to paying the extra on the build of their property, they weren't prepared to pay it.
Wow. When was this?
That would have been around probably 2010.
Wow.
I know.
When at a point when putting solar panels on your roof is probably twice or 4 times, or
you'd think so, but the uptake wasn't huge.
yeah, interesting.
You know,
Why?
I think that they just misread the customer sentiment. People want it to be green. People don't want to pay for it. They want it to be green. What they'd rather spend $5,000 on is a nice built-in home cinema. When it came to the crunch, unfortunately,
yeah,
that mindset's changing these days.
That's a pretty stellar adoption of solar in South Australia, fortunately. But yes,
that's right. But that was another interesting job there. I worked for an Adelaide-based company called Magato, who do mining comminution. Basically, they crush rocks. All the mines have these big ball mill things that spin around and crush rocks, and it's terribly inefficient. So they wanted to introduce a method to measure the efficiency of the ball mill discharge. They add chemicals and they erode steel balls. There's a trade-off between what they put in, what they put out to recover minerals. That was my first foray into X-ray, because we used X-ray fluorescence as a sensor to do that. And
look inside the rocks.
That was pretty cool. But there's another industry where Magato, a huge company, and the Dr. Chris Greet, who's based here, he's a great chap up in Wingfield. He would go to his board, which happened to be over in Chile, the Chilean mining company, and would ask for some money to develop this product. It wasn't very much. It was like $1 million, which might sound a lot, but it's actually quite not.
Yeah,
what we would
relative to a mining company, I think it's, yeah.
Couldn't get it. But they were happy to give his mate $20 million for a bigger digger, because that's a way of getting more money, even though it's not efficient. So anyway, he managed to get some grants. I mean, he did the product for him and developed it, put it on a mining site, did the trials, demonstrated a 5% increase in mining recovery, which is worth like
a lot
per minute. Got to the end of the trial, asked the miner, would he buy the equipment? No, haven't got any capital budget. So again, it's this whole understanding the customer. It's the way the system works. Each person owning different parts of the mine has a different budget, and they must operate within it. So no one really sits on the top and goes, if I could buy that, it would benefit everyone's budget. So I just learned all through this experience at Invitech, working with all these different companies, and trying to understand how they actually took their ideas and generated some income from it. It was only really the large companies with the big distribution networks that were successful. Even large companies without distribution networks really struggle.
So the not Coca-Colas of the world.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Finding partners, I think, is a very positive thing. Micro-X, right at the beginning of time, the technology was pretty cool. We invented a new way of making X-rays. We thought that would set an opportunity for getting a product into a known space, a known market area, mobile X-ray. Perhaps with hindsight, not quite disruptive enough, but it was about learning and proving the technology could work because we didn't actually know really at the beginning. It was a risk. The big one.
You want to talk about how you got into Micro-X? How did you get involved?
Oh, yes. Actually, after Invitech, I joined a company called Hydrix, and I joined there as a program director to help build the mechanical engineering capability of the team there. And about 2 weeks later, I met Peter Rowland, who's the founder of Micro-X. And he had a $50,000 technology voucher from the Victorian government and an idea. And he convinced me that he had this technology and it worked. And I looked at it, I thought, that's pretty cool. I can see lots of future opportunity for that. So I helped him basically build the whole journey, the roadmap, the development roadmap, the future product roadmap. And we're talking quite complex mechanical, electronics, software integration, design. And I did say to him, this is great, Peter. It's going to cost probably $15 or $20 million for us to build and develop this and build a manufacturing capability to do it. What's the sales model? He went, don't worry about that. We've signed up Carestream. I thought, who's Carestream? Turns out it's Kodak rebranded. And I thought, that's terrific. We've now got a significant brand representing our product, and they've got a global sales and distribution network, and they've got the accounts, and they, in the medical space, it's quite difficult to sell into a hospital because they have royalties. They might be a Siemens hospital, they might be a Philips hospital. They're selling, Philips will go in and sell maybe a couple of MRIs, a bunch of ultrasounds, and a few CT machines, fluoroscopy, and a few mobile X-ray cards. It's a bundle. I'd turn up and say, here's my Micro-X card, and you buy it. But guys are kind of, who's going to service it? We know these people, we trust these, and that sort of stuff. So it's quite difficult. So Carestream, I thought, that's brilliant. We've got a channel partner. And actually, there's still a key customer of ours in there, and they're an active partner of ours selling products. Problem is, it's not their product. As a result, we've had to extend that and start selling ourselves, effectively in competition with our own product being sold by Carestream. And we've learned the hard way that building that network is very expensive, takes a long time, quite difficult with sales and distribution into the space. I think if our products had been even more disruptive, like if it had fundamentally changed something around the X-ray, like the dose, that would be a different story. But it's not there yet. We think it might be, by the way. We've actually learned. And this is quite an important thing too, because you get transfixed on things as issues. So first of all, there was fixing our core technology. We had a tube, X-ray tube. We thought it worked. We tried to build another one, couldn't do it. 300 tubes later, still couldn't build one. Then we discovered that actually there was something a bit rotten inside. Fixed it. That took a while. We did that actually with the help of Flinders University, working with some researchers there. We basically reinvented our own technology. We went right back to the drawing board, and got it working. Meanwhile, we're selling some products, and we've got our own product out there now. We lost my train of thought on that one.
So sorry, I'm talking about getting to the point of having a working version that you can then sell to the market.
And we basically worked very closely with a lot of radiographers, and they guided us in the whole journey. And loved the product, like I said, but then of course we couldn't sell it. Now, it's disruptive in that it's small, lightweight, reliable, all those business things, but it's not disruptive in reducing dose. That's what everyone cared about. And that's what we learned afterwards. So the industry traditionally is conscious of dose. No one really talks about it because the old technology can't do anything about it. It is what it is. You turn your light bulb on, out comes your X-ray.
Yeah, now obviously the context here is that you don't want too much X-ray dose because it's not good for you.
It's not. It depends. At the end of the day, a chest X-ray you get is the equivalent X-ray that you'd get on a flight, say, from Sydney to LA.
Yeah.
So it's not very much. But a CT would be, say, 30,000 times. That's quite a lot. So you don't really
30,000 times is not ideal. Yeah.
So reducing dose is a thing.
Yeah.
And for the operators too, there's them pressing the button all day. So those kind of things, Anyway, we've learned since then that because our technology actually delivers a very pure signal, like a square wave, we actually are dose efficient. Meanwhile, the rest of the industry has been trying to focus on reducing total dose by improving detectors. And now the detector technology is so advanced, if they use it with our X-ray source, they can reduce the dose even further. But that's the level of disruption that really could make a big difference in terms of people focusing on wanting to buy our product.
Yeah.
Because there's no one that can say, I will choose someone else's product over ours and make that conscious decision they're going to overdose a patient for the same outcome.
Yeah, that's
We
interesting.
we didn't think about that. It was
Yeah.
all about making it small and making it more reliable, making it. So we didn't market that at all. But now we're looking
Yeah.
at how we go back and
It-
market that. If we'd have really understood what drove the mindset of the customer.
Yeah, and where to focus innovation. I think that's an
Right.
interesting
We would
one,
think, yeah.
probably for everyone, both in a small business context, but also in larger businesses. If we often do things along the lines of whatever it is, make it smaller, make it faster, without really realizing the core area that we need to improve is something completely different. And that's a good example of that.
It's very easy to get really focused on the brilliance of your core technology.
Yeah.
And forget really, and just abstract yourself to think, what do people really care about?
Yeah. And so how large is the business now? Hydrix?
Oh, we're a listed company. I think we're about 70 or 80 million market cap, but
Yep.
varies on a daily basis. We were a bit more than that.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got about 120 people, mixture on about maybe 50, 55 or so engineers, scientists of different disciplines. We're now in Seattle as well.
The big
about it.
success story in it started with just basically you as the only engineer and
Pretty much.
Peter is
Yeah.
just the two of you
Yeah.
originally, and visiting you and Melvin to try and
Yep.
get things off the ground. So I'm just curious in that sort of context, lessons learned along the way in growing a business.
You've got to take a lot of risk. There's no doubt
Right.
about it. You've got to be brave and be courageous and be confident. Sometimes my palette for risk isn't perhaps as high as Peter's, but that's because I know I have to fix the problem. But you still,
Right.
but
He breaks it, you fix it.
he calls himself cash extraction officer. He raises the money and I spend it. Hopefully, you have to be brave in your commitments. Australia is a very difficult place to actually raise money, and there's not a lot of it around.
Yeah.
And
At the
people-
scale that you're
at the scale
working
you
at.
need, yeah, and in the hardware industry, the amount of capital investment you need is a lot.
Anyone here in hardware? Yeah, couple. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hardware is hard is the
Hardware's expensive.
is the saying.
Whether you're building your own manufacturing operation
Yeah.
or you're outsourcing it to a subcontractor, all expensive. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
You have to buy lots of inventory. You have to be prepared. For example, Carestream said that if you're going to go through the launch gate, we need to make sure you've got at least enough stock to build to our demand for the first 6 months. So we have to invest that cash. They won't give us that cash.
Yeah.
We have to invest that cash. It's $2 million. If we didn't have. So what do? You've got no revenue coming in. You're surviving on money you've raised through investment by whatever means, by grants. And suddenly you've got $2 million of it sitting on the shelf, hoping someone else is going to sell it. It's pretty scary, but you've got to make that decision. You've got to go with it and put strategies in place to try and mitigate your risk there. So yeah, it's very risky. You've got to be comfortable with risk, but you've also got to be prepared to change very quickly and react. And I think that the MicroX journey, one day it'll be written up because it's quite an interesting one.
Hopefully.
I can find a picture when I started, I had hair. And it was almost like I felt in the first 2 years, I felt we were changing direction almost every week.
Yeah.
There was a sort of a path we were going towards. It was a good strategy we were following, but the path to get there was all right in the shop. And it depended what was important at the time.
Would you do it the same if you had to do it again?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I perhaps would have I think the main difference would have been I would have focused a little bit more on the go-to-market strategy. Peter and I are both engineers. We have commercial experience. I think we've been surprised how difficult it is to penetrate the market when it's full of established brands. In fairness to us, our strategy was OEM to Carestream, let them go and sell it. It wasn't a bad strategy, but perhaps we should have introduced 3 or 4 OEMs earlier, spread our risk a little bit, perhaps focus more on just getting their minimum viable products, not, sounds bad, but not listening to our customer driving our requirements. So they kept adding stuff, do this, add this. Let's reposition it here, let's add more features. All that's doing is pushing time out and adding cost. Gets in the end, you've got a bare minimum viable product now that actually costs more than it should.
Yeah.
So you're stuck. So yeah,
Yeah,
I would have done that a little bit differently.
Right. That's the theme I've heard over and over again, having worked with lots of startups as well, is we all talk about minimum viable product. However, we also talk about listening to your customers. And it's a really tricky balance of trying to figure out what features are absolutely necessary. And the different customers will say, I won't buy it if you don't have this. But then sometimes, surprisingly, you take that out and yeah, all right, I'll still buy it. And that's a really like tricky balance to find.
Well, here's a great example of that. RSNA is the global trade show of Royal Society of North America.
Yeah.
And it's a big trade show in Chicago every year. It's a pilgrimage for anyone in the X-ray business. It's huge. It's a big, I don't know if anyone's been to Chicago. The economic center there is just enormous, great exhibition space. Siemens and Philips and GE have got whole miles of stands and big equipment. So it's the best equipped hospital on the planet, frankly, for the reason it's there. And we turned up one year, invited them to the Carestream stand. The product was late, so they wouldn't put it on the stand, but they put it in a secret room out the back. We had queues and queues of people wanted to come in and see this new secret device that Carestream was developed. Yeah. And that was amazing. And they were coming in and they were talking about what they liked, what they didn't like, and we were noting it down. And that enabled us to make a few kind of usability improvements and stuff like that. But a key issue was we've been guided very heavily on the performance, the power of the product. So power in the X-ray world is a bit of a misnomer. It doesn't really mean anything. So our system uses hardly any power. It's actually quite efficient. So when we said, oh, it's only 6 kilowatts, everyone would walk out, oh no, I need this 12. Well, what's this kilowatt thing? What does that mean? They're just conditioned to having 12, 16 and 32 kilowatt X-ray machines because that's what they are. And they think they need it, but they don't. I cottoned onto this and I asked a medical physicist, what does that really mean? He went, oh, it's related to the amount of dose they can deliver over time. I said, okay. So the next day, people were coming in and they said, oh, what's the power? And I said, oh, 6.5 kilowatts. But it can do 120 kV and 12.5 mass, which is how they measure the dose. And they were like, oh, that's all right. So you got to learn how to communicate to everybody. It's weird.
So even the discussion around which features are important for customers needs to be framed in a language that makes sense.
So the trouble is, one of the specs sheet says, what's the power?
Yeah, first thing.
So you've got to think about that and communicating that. Yeah, it's just some good feedback. Is that?
Just a little bit in the system. Okay. We might take some questions here in a second, but before we do, last words of advice for entrepreneurs hoping to replicate some of the success you've had with MicroX.
Yeah, I think the key message in terms of the risk, we grow up in a sort of society that conditions us to not accept failure. You go through school, got to sit an exam, what happens if you fail? Oh, you don't get to go to university, or you don't get to do this, or you don't get that. You turn up, I see it recently, my kids going to football training, they're like 10 years old, they grade the players, so instantly telling half the team they're never going to be good enough. Some of them are like just pushing 10, some of them are 11 and a half. So clearly they're all going to, it's a conditioning, fear of failure is a bad thing. Yet you've got to completely flip that when you're in a sort of, in the innovation space, and you've got to actually encourage failure, because every time you fail, you learn something. And if you don't fail, then you're not trying hard enough, in my view. And the challenge with people that have this innate fear of failure is nothing happens. They'll sit there analyzing things, looking at things, doing things. No one actually commits to go and build something and testing it. Got to be prepared to fail. Try not to fail the same way twice, clearly. They try and learn from it. It's a different mindset. So that'd be my biggest words of advice. Don't be scared of failing.
Yeah, so many of the decisions we make are guided by being afraid of something.
Yeah, I think so.
So yeah, agree. Thank you. Questions from the audience. And if you do have a question, can we get a microphone as well so it can be heard online? Any questions for Anthony on building hardware businesses, startups, consulting, X-rays, whatever else you're interested in?
You're best to be an expert on X-ray.
Wow, you're compared to the room, you probably are.
Hey, Anthony, you did mention a lot about regulation as well. I'm quite interested to know, because in certain markets, you do find approaching different states helps a lot more to make an opening with the regulation. And then once one state's done it, the other states a little more follow through. Have you found that in Australia at all, working with different states? Has some states been easier to open the door with, and then the next one sort of follows through?
Yeah, okay. There's a few ways of answering that question. So Australia is a unique place. It's a bit like the US, where the regulations differ from state to state, in particular in the radiation space. Queensland happens to have it's known globally in the whole radiology industry of having a completely different set of regulations than every other standard regulation that's out there. So that's not very helpful. But generally, if you pass in one state, it doesn't necessarily help in the next, I don't feel. We generally work towards more global standards and regulations. In the medical devices, there's a global safety standard. There are different regulations in the US and different regulations in Europe. The European regulations, the medical device regulation, is a very challenging and very new directive to pass. We've been doing that now for 18 months to put the same product we're already marketing into Europe with a CE mark on it, but with a different name. That's quite challenging. Once you have those two in medical devices, you're pretty much safe globally, apart from a few countries like China and Japan that have their own regulations, but they'll accept the same technical file, which is why following those regulations and those standards is very important from the outset. And they actually are these days, they're very prescriptive. You can get some advice, or you can go to a website and it'll tell you exactly, this is what we expect to see. You just do that. It's actually not hard. To be fair, I find most of them are written around best practice anyway. And it's only when people are trying to cut corners or not do something properly that they find a challenge. In terms of doing some of the things that you need to do to comply with those regulations, that is challenging here in Australia. I actually have to go, if I need to do electromagnetic compatibility testing, I have to go to Melbourne for that. There's nothing in South Australia. To do the medical device safety testing, I can go to New Zealand, or I can go to China or Singapore. I can't even do that in Australia. That is a challenge. But over time, we've built good relationships. We actually do it in China with these guys. We do a lot of Zooming now. They trust us. We're open book. That's another message. We've been very collaborative in getting our 13485 certification and 9001, all these standards, all these things you must have if you want to sell into certain countries. We've just been really open and collaborative with the auditors. And they often tell us in the wrap up, that was amazing. You've just shown us everything. And they feel confident that we're not hiding anything, and we're not. And I think that's important. So yeah, they are another significant stakeholder that you must understand. The regulator, but also the auditor. Because they're the ones that really, if they make a mistake and they give you an accreditation and you stuff up, there's no comeback on them, apart from their own personal brand has been damaged. So they care about that because that's their livelihood. So you need to make sure that you understand their needs too. Yeah, did that answer the question?
Great. Any other questions before we break here? Yeah, right here.
When you were developing the technology, how much time do you actually spend with radiographers in actual hospitals as focus group, or were they your key group you worked with, and what other groups did you bring in doing that sort of process?
That's a really good question, because often people identify customers. They might pick a few people they might have a relationship with, go and have a chat with them, then come back and sit in their ivory tower engineering the solution for the next 6 years. Then maybe go back and ask them at the end, what do you think? That's generally pretty bad. I've always been a big fan of customer-centric design. Being a consultant, I've always had to work very closely with my customers. And it's not generally just the engineering team that I'm engaging with. I want to understand the people that are driving them, their product marketers and their customers. And that's how you become a successful consultant, because you actually deliver what sells for them rather than what they thought they wanted. It's a balancing act. In the development of our first product, the Nano, we struck a relationship up with the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne, radiology department there, which is one of the leading teaching hospitals in Australia in radiology. And we paid, and we agreed it with the head of radiology, we paid their head radiographer as a consultant to come in every Friday morning and basically tear strips of all our ideas. So yes, we did. We'd go and observe, we'd go and learn as much as we could, but generally speaking, people are quite sensitive about a bunch of engineers with a pad walking around a hospital taking notes, trying to take a picture, which I'm allowed to do. Yeah, we had heavy involvement. And then that was through the early sort of concepting phase. We also relied on Carestream to provide their input, and they had a deep domain knowledge in their customers, which came through their product manager, who fortunately was an ex-radiographer. So it was genuinely good feedback. So it was very interactive. I built probably a wooden prototype of the X-ray cart roughly once every 2 weeks. Maybe it was just the existing base, or maybe change bits that we were trying to learn from, focusing in different areas. A period of about 12 months. In fact, I named them after Australian prime ministers, and we ran out. We had that many, and we were just maturing different bits. And once it got to a certain level of maturity, so it was safe, I put it in the back of the ute, and we'd drive to Dandenong Hospital, and we'd speak to the network, reach out to people and say, can we come in and show you our stuff? Generally, people are quite willing to have a look. They're a bit bored. They do the same job every day. Why not? Let's have a chat. And they're using this equipment all day long. So they've got far more knowledge than people that are selling it to them. But yeah, we did a lot of that. At one point, we built a tubular. We were running a bit low on funds, and we were doing a second round of private capital raising. Big bunch of investors came in through our friends. who had done the initial investment in us. And I built a bit of a fancy one using kind of tubular metal, a bit like these chairs. And it looked good, and it had this balanced arm on it, and it had a dummy X-ray tube and generator. It captured all the main principles that we learned. So I reckon I've been going for about 7 months of iterative prototyping and development. And right at the, like an hour before they came in, we had these handles, and they were really sharp. Someone had hacksawed these handles. It was this tube, and I thought, oh, they're going to touch that. That's no good. There was a sports shop next door, so I went and bought 2 tennis balls. I sprayed them silver quickly, cut a hole in and whacked them on the top. Anyway, all the investors cycled in, and Peter gave a bit of a spiel. I introduced myself, talked a bit, and then we introduced the radiographer, Danielle, and she came in, and she walked up, and she just walked straight over to the machine. She hadn't seen these handles, and she went, "Oh, what is that?" I thought, "Oh no." And she put her hand on. She went, "These are amazing. I can stand anywhere, and I can spin it around, and my hand is completely free." I'm writing this down, right? But we'd gone through, I'd tell you how many we looked at. I'd studied every single pram, every single supermarket trolley that was out there, wheelchairs. We tried all these conventional handles, all that constrain people's hands. And it was just a fluke. But you've got to be open to that. You go, "Hey, I think that's a really good idea. We'll have that one." And now the ergo knobs, as they're being marketed as, are one of the selling features. And we have radiographers spin them around in elevators like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
See it
really,
for your Super Bowl ad.
very-
That's what it will be, is radio. Yeah, just
that's exactly right.
yeah. Spin your ad. Well, I'm gonna cut it there and say thank you so much, Anthony. Really appreciate that. That was a great talk. Thank you for everyone attending and for online. There should be some food that's come now. Feel free to hang around, grab a bite, have a drink, and obviously come up and have a chat with Anthony. And thank you again for coming tonight.